This is the Illuminate podcast, a Sandy Boy production. Each week on the Illuminate podcast, the hosts will bring you insightful conversations and stories of people who are illuminating their own lives through their business, work, community, family, and world.
Hello and welcome to the Illuminate podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Emma Benner, and today I'm sharing episode 84 with Gaby Rodriguez. Gaby is a certified gender professional, Venezuelan lawyer, and a social economy specialist. She is also the founder and chair of the Amazona Foundation, which works on deconstructing harmful traditional gender roles that are attributed to men, women, and people of gender and sexual diversities in society. Through the Amazona Foundation, she hosts monthly events to build community around gender equality, raises awareness around gender equality, and advises other clients on the creation and implementation of their gender diversity and inclusion plan for their programs. I loved getting to chat with Gaby and hear her perspective on so many different topics and hear how we can all work to deconstruct harmful traditional gender roles in our own communities. So let's get right into my conversation with Gaby Rodriguez. Well, today on the Illuminate podcast, I'm so excited to be interviewing Gaby Rodriguez. Welcome to the show, Gaby.
Thank you very much, Emma. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we just kick it off in the best way possible and you just introduce yourself, catch the listeners up, and tell us who you are.
Awesome. So I am a Venezuelan immigrant in the United States. And I am also the founder and chair of a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. The name of the organization is Amazona Foundation. It's Spanglish name. So basically, we're working on gender equality. That's why it's called Amazona, like the Amazon's warrior in the Greek mythology. And we're building a community around gender equality. At the same time, we're empowering Hispanic women in the DMV, because we want to amplify the voices of Hispanic immigrants as myself. And when I say that we're building community around gender equality, I mean that we're reflecting on gender in community, right? We want to have the opportunity to reflect on the different topics that are included in gender, but that communities may not know that we're speaking about it. So yeah, that's what I do at this point. I am also a Venezuelan lawyer, but since I left the country, I am basically working as a consultant. So that's what I do, and that's the way I will describe today.
Awesome. So are you doing the consulting on top of the nonprofit work, or is the nonprofit work more of your full-time?
Yeah, no, the nonprofit is more about my full-time job at this point. But I do offer like consulting services for organizations. For example, this March, because it's the Women's Month as well, not only the International Women's Day, we're going to be hosting some trainings for some companies in El Salvador and in Venezuela, because the topic is too little explored in Latin America, or when we speak about equality, we're just speaking about gender-based violence, and it's more than that. So the consulting services is something additional, but at this point, like full-time job, like my everyday is full with the Amazona Foundation agenda.
Oh, awesome. And can you tell us more about the story behind the foundation? How did it come about? Like, what led to you seeing a need for it to be created?
That's a great question. So the story behind is that even if I study law in Venezuela, I think I always had this passion about social issues. But at the time, I mean, when I was in college, I remember speaking with my dad, who was a politician and a doctor, and I said about like doing something related to social work, and his words were something translated from Spanish, something equivalent like, Gaby, social things don't pay the bills. And I was like, okay, Dad, okay. So I will be working as a lawyer, and then I will volunteer my whole life. That's it. Because that's what I was doing at the time, and it was great. But also I wanted to do something else. I mean, something bigger than just volunteering for just a few hours during the month. And I also wanted to have the creative liberty or freedom, the creative freedom to lead an organization, right? To say, this is what I think we should do, and actually implement it. So at that time I was like, I don't know, maybe 17. And I finished my law degree. I then moved to Paris, and I was in an environment where social issues are part of the dinner conversation, right? So you're going to speak about the differences between religions. You're going to be speaking about abortion. You're going to be speaking about trans people in a very normal and non-judgmental way, to say it, to frame it in a simple way. So when I was living in Paris, it was like the paradise for me, in the sense of I had the freedom to actually express myself through social issues. I didn't have to wear this hat of I need to be a lawyer and be productive and be successful so I can do my social things like in my leisure time. But I couldn't incorporate a nonprofit in France because I was an immigrant. It's super complex to navigate the legal system in the country. I had a visa at the time, and it was just like too complex to create a company or an organization without being a national. So I don't know, like maybe in 2 years after that, I finished my master's degree in social economy. I started a relationship with my husband, who was living in Caracas at the time, and he was forced into exile to the United States. And when he came to the States, we were just like looking for professional opportunities for me, and I found this amazing internship at the Organization of American States. For those who don't know, it's an international organization which works on democracy, human rights, and human development in the Americas. So basically the whole region, right? And that was nice. I mean, you read the paper, you read the numbers, I found out that there was this huge gender gap in terms of numbers. It was not only in politics, but also in companies. And that was something that I didn't really see when I was living in my home country. And it's sad to admit it, but it's the truth. So when I saw those numbers, I felt like super uncomfortable about it. And I was like, why nobody's doing anything about it? And that was not the right question. I mean, there are a lot of people doing something about gender inequality, about racial justice, about sexual and reproductive rights. I was the one who was not doing something about it because I hadn't recognized the problem at that time. So I remember that I wanted to work in a nonprofit when I was 17. I remember that I had this huge passion about social things, social topics, and that I couldn't actually do something about it in Paris. And for me, like being in the States, this was the moment, because the legal system to create a company is way easier than in France. So I decided to do it. And then like everything fell into place when I realized like the same experiences that I had when I was little. And when I say little, I mean like when I was, in college. So like around 17, 19.
Yeah.
I had this trans woman who was my civil law professor, and she was the first person speaking about gender equality for me. But at that time, I was like trying to absorb her reality, just like, oh, this is the challenges that a trans person face. And the truth is that, and I find a lot of people who think this way today, it's not about them and about us. This is happening to all of us, but we just don't have the awareness to identify how gender is impacting our lives. So when I was here in DC and I saw those numbers, I was able to match the information that I received when I was 19 from this law professor with my current experiences, like being in a toxic relationship with a partner who was like dealing with a toxic masculinity, being a survivor of a sexual assault, and all those things are related to gender. So when I figured out like these all have the same root causes, I was like, this is it. I need to create a foundation. I need to speak about gender, and this is the place to do so. So it's a long answer, but this was a process of probably, I don't know, maybe more than a decade. So yeah, that's probably the story behind it.
Wow, that's a powerful story leading to creating this foundation. So it took a whole decade to create the foundation, or you created it kind of right away and then that was the events to follow?
I created probably with the first salary I got in the United States. So the decade, it's more about the process of taking the decision that that's something that I wanted to do in an organization. Because when I was 17, I was volunteering for other nonprofits in Venezuela related to HIV, AIDS, boys living in foster care homes. So that was like, it was like I was walking around without even knowing where I was going. And when I left the country and then spent like 3 or 4 years out of Venezuela and I got to the States, it was that was the moment where I said, okay, this is it. Before that, I can't say like I was totally conscious about what I wanted to do at the time.
Yeah, it's really so amazing to see when someone is passionate about something and sees a problem and doesn't just sit back and think about it and get frustrated by it and actually does something like you did and put it in action. So can you talk more in depth about the programs and campaigns and advocacy that you do to challenge this discrimination?
Yeah, so the other piece of information is like it's very different to be a Latina in your home country, a Latina in Europe, and a Latina in the United States. I don't think that's a new piece, like new information for anyone. But I did realize that it was important for me to speak from my experience as an immigrant, because this is a complex and a sensitive topic in the United States for several reasons. And I think it's easier for me to create a space first for Hispanics to understand about why it's important to have a vice president who is not only a woman, but a woman with a cultural background that makes not only African Americans and Asian, but also who is the daughter of immigrants, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And sometimes it's hard because you're gonna hear something like, oh, it's because she's a woman, and the answer is just like, oh, do you have time for a coffee? Let's talk about this. Because otherwise it's like too confrontational to actually say to someone like, she's a qualified politician. She has a history just like you do. And it's actually very important to have the representation of a woman with her background in the vice presidency. And I'll tell you why. So what we do is exactly the same. Like, it's like I invite a coffee for 10 or 20 people per month.
Oh, yeah.
Just to have this conversation about topics that, in our perception or view, it's like people are too sensitive or they are exaggerating. And the reality behind that position is that we don't have the whole story. I don't have it either, but I'm pretty sure that I'm looking for answers. So what I do, like in a monthly basis, is to create digital content so they can start speaking about these things. Example, speaking about racism in Latin America, it's a whole different world because we were taught that racism is not a thing, that we are a beautiful melting pot. So this is something that happens in United States because Americans are too politically correct. And then you have these sensitivities. And when you study history and you realize that the beginning of the story, for example, in Venezuela, it starts with the colonization. And there is no criticism behind that. We celebrate, like October 12th, we celebrate that we were discovered by the Spanish. And this is like, let's talk about this, because we were not taught that the African diaspora was brought into this continent in a criminal way, that this was a violation of their human rights, that they were treated as objects, as merchandise. So we don't speak about the genocide of African communities. And at the same time, we don't even speak about our own native Venezuelans. I mean, you will think, maybe not you, but people would think about Latin Americans and native in the region as indigenous people. But if you see the population in Venezuela, for example, you're going to have like 3% of our population is indigenous people. And the answer for that is that there was a genocide in my country as well. But we are taught in the school that it was a great thing that we were discovered by the Spanish. And at the same time, I think we need to create the space to discuss those things. So that's what we do on a monthly basis, and on a yearly basis, we host training to the Hispanic migrant community, and particularly for women, because I think it's important for us to not only amplify our voices, but at the same time to lead an agenda that reflects our interests and our realities. So this year, I think the training is going to be more focused about how we can actually have access to funds, because it's beautiful to lead a project, even to run for office, but you need to get the funds somewhere. And if you're in a community who is struggling to having access to employment because of legal restrictions, or if you come from a family who was not wealthy in your home country, or even in the United States, if you're a second or third immigrant, generation immigrant, you need to actually work differently with accessing funds. So it's related to the relationship we have with money. It's related to the networks we create in the United States. And it's also related to the way we have something to contribute to this country from our own perspective. How can we add value to the United States? And I'm specifically working with first generation immigrants, because there are other like differences between the experiences, right? So at this point, we're more focused about the training, the monthly gatherings, and we're starting to actually conduct some survey about poverty period in Venezuela, and we're exploring the opportunity to actually create a communication campaign about Hispanics immigrants around the world, because migration is a normal part of our society and of our history, and I think it's important to start hearing their voices and their contributions instead of having this narrative of like, how did you get to this country? Do you have papers? Are you undocumented? Are you poor? It's like, those are situations that can happen to any human being. And the fact that you have someone who may have a different cultural background, it could be actually very positive to the countries. So I want to highlight these contributions to the host countries, if that makes any sense.
Oh, Wow, yeah, that is just amazing work. And can you touch on more about something you mentioned was that it's different to be a Latina in your home country, in France, in the United States. Can you expand on that more and talk about those differences?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I hope I explain myself correctly with this point. So when you're in your home country, you're the average citizen. I mean, you're gonna face inequality and discrimination related to your own circumstances, but you belonged to that place. Like nobody's gonna question your identity, right? Nobody's gonna assume that you may have somewhere else to be because that's your country. So that's the first thing, the first feeling. And the other thing is like the way that we perceive immigrants change a lot depending on the history of each country. So because in France, even if you have Latinos or Hispanics, we were not the biggest immigrant population. The biggest immigrant population came from Africa and Arabs countries, like I don't remember the names in English. Oh my God, like Morocco or
right, yeah,
yeah. So and they have their own history of colonization as well. So the biggest challenges in France as an immigrant were therefore citizens from those countries. So as a Latina, I was just a random immigrant, but I was not making too much noise because we're like very few. And if you're gonna get there, it's because at least you're gonna, it depends obviously, but in my case, at that time, I had a profession. I went with a specific visa. I was there to study, and I actually spoke the language at that time. So the barriers were there, but they were like way softer for me. And then when I got to the States, I started to hear all these labels. And then it's like as soon as I got here, I became a minority. And I was a minority in France, but they don't use that language. I became brown. So suddenly the color of my skin was relevant. And that's something that I hadn't experienced before coming to the States. And at the same time, it's very important for me, like my language, obviously because it's related to my family history, my emotions, my life. So for me, the Spanish is just like a beautiful thing that I want to embrace. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have tried this Clubhouse app, which is actually great.
I have not. I've heard about it, but I don't really know much about it.
You must give it a try because it's like you can have access to a whole world just by being on your phone, and you're gonna be present in live conversations about different people. So when I started to hear the experiences of Hispanics in the United States, and I say Hispanics because it's for me super difficult to accept the Latinx, because in my mind, in my Spanish mind, doesn't make any sense. I understand the concept and I think it's actually very reasonable to use it. But for me, I am a Latina. And before coming to the States, I was not a Latina, I was Venezuelan. And so those layers of identities are just like codes you start to wear when you understand that you need to present yourself in a way that other people can just like understand where you're at. And the problem probably with that is that you ended in a box. So I've been surprised at the amount of times that I am asked or someone in my close network, like, how did you get to the country? And it's just like, I don't know what you're assuming, but it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So those things are related to the experience and about how countries have managed, like well managed or poor managed, the integration of migrants and nationals, which once again, it could be a beautiful contribution and a great benefit for both. But because this bridge hasn't been built, we have like these separated wards where we are in different categories. And in France, I am not their biggest problem. I'm just one Latina in a huge universe of migrants that they have different positions about it. And in the United States, I'm a Latina among, I don't know, 11 or millions of undocumented people. And these have like a different perspective and repercussion and a different discussion in this country. So that was difficult for me to understand. And at the same time, I was like, okay, I have no idea what it means to be here and to have like probably parents who don't speak the language and who need me to learn English as fast as possible so I can, I don't know, help them with the taxes and with legal forms. Or for example, being one of the providers for my youngest brothers or siblings, right? I don't have that experience. I don't have the experience of being bullied in school because I have a Hispanic background. So I know that those differences are there. I just want to say like, okay, this is where we're at. What we want to do with this? Where do we want to go as a society with this information? Like we all have different experiences. None of them are more important or less important than the others. I just want to acknowledge that we are all here with our processes, but we can do something greater and more beautiful together. So let's find for a way to build bridges between all of us.
Yeah, wow. I really appreciate you sharing that and sharing about your experience. And it is true. Just if we all unite and accept people, no matter their background, no matter where they're from, no matter really anything about them, it's just how much stronger we could be if we just united. And isn't that what's been really obvious the last couple years? And especially this last year is just the importance that we need to reflect on our beliefs and reflect on what needs to change in our country to have more kindness and acceptance and unification of everyone. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Kind of going off of that, you talk a lot about like gender inequalities and traditional gender roles and everything. And what is the difference that you see in problems with gender discrimination and harmful gender traditions and things like that? What are the differences that you see across cultures? Or is there really a consistent problem with this?
I would say like the consistency is the fact that we are all dealing with gender inequality. The difference is that we're not facing gender inequality in the same way. So, for example, if I think like the foundation of the whole inequality process is the education we receive. So let's take the example of sex education or sexuality education, if that's like more accurate. When you tell a kid that there are just women and men, and this is the result of a biological fact, you leave no room to recognize that you have intersex people. You leave no room to recognize that gender is a social construct and as such is dynamic. And you leave no room to make people understand that sexuality is something that you're going to be developing in your whole life. So, for example, in France, they are very open about sexuality. And in Venezuela, you will have sex education related to how you're going to have a baby. This is a male condom. And just close your legs. That's pretty much the information you have. And that's it. And I know that everything changes per state in the United States. And I understand that it depends on how like progressive or conservative is the state and the school. But I understand that there is a fact of abstinence. Is that the right way to say it?
In the United States, yeah, that is that is pretty much the idea that is displayed in like sex education throughout high school.
Yeah, so that's the foundation of it. But at the same time, you have references in this country of more progressive legislations in terms of sexual and reproductive rights. For example, abortion is a crime in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. In France, you have access. You may find like doctors who are opposed and institutions that make that will add obstacles to have you access to a safe abortion, but it's legal. And you have and you have a different legislation here depending on the state, right? But at least you have a reference in your country that some of the states have more progressive legislation. And it's the same with trans people. Like the fact that you can actually make a transition in the United States is just like landing into Mars for Venezuelans. So there is no way that we can have a conversation about legislating for accessing safe abortions in Venezuela. There is no way that we can speak about same-sex marriage. So all those things are legal. In France, it's completely legal, and they have like a different way to approach sexuality. And when you understand sexuality as a major topic that it's encompasses by biological sex, gender identity, sexual expression, sexual orientation, you understand like you have so many things to speak about it. And at the same time, this concept is super important to speak about relationships, about consent, about how do you want to create a family? When do you want to do it? So the difference of the perspective that we have in sex education, for example, in these three countries, changed the whole narrative and the whole picture of the gender inequality in each country. So you have, in this case, a lot of feminicides in Venezuela. You have like 3 or 4 per every 3 days. The number may be wrong because they are increasing, but you don't have the same aggressive numbers in France. It doesn't mean that they are not there. It means like their way to solve problems is not through violence. The way that they present women are not only as objects of consumptions for males. So those things are important. And somewhere you will find like states in between these two positions in the United States, because first, the country is huge, and second, because as you know better than me, you have different positions, like more progressive and more conservative, and you have states who have more influence from like more diverse cultures, and that's something that plays a big role in gender inequality.
So then, what are some actions we can all take in our daily lives to help tackle some of these problems?
I would say like a first action is to start being curious. I mean, I don't know everything. I give myself the permission to keep learning about even the things I'm working today with gender inequality, but we all have opinions. And the thing is like, we all have opinions, but we all don't take the time to actually read and justify that opinion. And when I say read, I'm speaking now about professional and academic and like people who have an informed opinion. So not read like from Facebook page or Reddit or just Twitter. Yeah, because when you say like educate yourself, I have no idea what sources this person is using. So yes, go to the library and look for information about gender equality is a great way. I go a lot to the library in the United States, and that's something that I didn't do in Venezuela. So that's a great thing. And at the same time, when I say be curious, I'm thinking about asking other people about their ideas, their experiences. Once again, I have no idea what is to be Latina or Latinx in the United States, but I can ask. What is the difference? This is the way it was for me. How was for you? And just creating the room to have this conversation is a great first step. And the third, I do focus a lot about communities, because I don't think like we can wait for governments, organizations, and companies to solve our problems. And the third thing is become an ally. Doesn't mean like you're gonna have the answers for everything, or that you're gonna be the one leading the conversation, but you can definitely open the space for someone from a specific community to tell their truth to your friends, to your network, and actually amplify their voices through like networking. We need to tell the story to more people. So I really appreciate that you are creating this space for me to share my story, because otherwise, like, my immediate network is very, very similar than so this is giving me the opportunity to actually present a different perspective to your audience. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I just appreciate you sharing it and being able to open all of our minds and open up the conversation to think about it. And then I think something that's really important to changing like problematic things in our society is like parenting and changing things for people at a younger age. So yes. How do you think gender roles and any sort of discrimination, really, what are your thoughts on that? How can discrimination of any sorts of race or gender, how can that be just deconstructed at a younger age as people grow up? Like, what can adults do to ensure that the next generation is being educated and changing their ways?
Wow, that's a great and tough question. Because I also know like there is a lot of mom shaming, and that it is a huge responsibility to raise a kid, and I am not a mother, so I want to be very cautious about that. But I think it's very important to allow yourself to question your beliefs. I'll give you an example. So my mom is a big fan of dolls. And she didn't think like I was very into other toys. So I think I played Barbie until like 11, when the political conversation got so bad in my country that I switched to playing Barbies to speaking about politics with 11 years, which for me, it's like, these people stole my childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the way it is. But today, it's difficult for me to understand that my mom didn't think about me playing with different toys. Toys have no sex, no gender. But we tend to start like buying the same things. And I've tried to go to a toy store, and you have everything classified by colors, and it's organized by sex. So when you try to look for something neutral, you're going to spend like 2 or 3 times more just to try to find for a thing that doesn't have like a girl taking care of a baby, or a gun with a little boy with glasses, right? So it's just like, where are like the scientific toys? Where are the creative toys? Or how can I reflect on my experience about what did I play? For example, my husband has this great story about when he wanted to play with a Barbie, and his mom was like, okay, just take the Barbie. And that was it. So, and my mom didn't have this idea, but she had the idea about giving me books. So there are a lot of books that are showing a different perspective. I think we need more books in Spanish, for sure. So I found beautiful books about sexuality, gender, inclusion in English, and that's great. But if you're an immigrant and it's important for you to create this connection with the Spanish or whatever language you speak, I think it's actually very nice to buy for books to kids. in their languages, so they can develop other ways to express themselves and be close to other realities. So basically, toys have no sex. Buy some books and reflect on how you were raised, because that's what it's gonna allow you to do not replicate the same unconscious bias that you were taught when you were little. We all have it. I think we will still have it even if we make the greatest effort, but we can improve and we can allow the children to make their thoughts and to grow in a more inclusive space.
So going off of that, do you on the top of your head remember some of the titles of those some of those books that you were talking about?
Yes. So there is one that is from, I think, I don't know the name in English, like the company that produces them. I don't know. In Spanish it's editorial, but I don't know if it's editorial in English. So from Little People, Big Dreams, you have the story of Simone de Beauvoir. She's a French author, and that's a beautiful, beautiful book for girls. There is another one that I understand it has been banned in so many places in the United States because of its content. The name is It's Perfectly Normal. And it's about sexuality in general. So the subtitle is something like Changing Bodies, Growing Up, Sex and Sexual Health. So those two are like super nice. And there was a third one. Well, I will recommend two more in Spanish in case someone in your audience wants to explore those topics.
For sure.
So there is one which translate like Lilith Treasure, so El Tesoro de Lilith. And it's a story about how to connect with your body and periods for young girls. It's a very beautiful and like artistic way to present how your body is always speaking, not only during your period, but how it's like reflecting your internal feelings and your world. So that's very cute. That's probably for very young girls, and there is some information at the end of the book. And another one who is very nice and it's new is what's the name? And that's for for Latin Americans or people who want to have other reference in the region. Women references is Venezuelan girls and women who dreamed to change the world and they did it. So venezolanas que soñaron con cambiar el mundo y lo hicieron. That's a beautiful book.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing those. And that leads really nicely into our end of podcast questions. So what is the best or most recent book that you have read?
So the most recent book that I read is about coaching because I am starting to become a life coach.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that's not a lot about gender equality, but it has a beautiful meaning because the book is from Eckhart Tolle or Tolle. I don't know how to pronounce the name. And it's The Power of Now. And I like it because it's about stop being in the future or in the past, because at the end of the day, those notions are gonna make you suffer in the sense of you cannot bring to life whatever happened in the past, and that creates sadness in your body. And when you anticipate to something that you have no idea if it happens, because the only moment that we know is the present, right? I mean, the future never comes. Every time that it's gonna be here, it becomes the present. So
yeah.
That anticipation creates a lot of anxiety in your body. So I think it's a beautiful book because at the end of the day, it allows you to be here and now, to enjoy the fact that, I don't know, I'm sitting in a bowl, I'm speaking with Emma on my phone. This has been an amazing conversation. And when you're present, you have nothing to worry about, because you're enjoying whatever you have in front of you. And maybe you're going to be like, okay, but what about the problems? And the concept of problems for him is like, it's like those are just vital situations, just like situations that you have to deal with in your life, but those are not your life. I mean, if you need to pay the rent at the end of the month, that's something that it's on the table, but your life is what you are actually experiencing. So that's the last book I read, and I was in the middle of Becoming from Michelle Obama.
I love that book.
And I was like, oh my God, I need to learn so many things about this country. So I haven't finished, but I am enjoying that book as well.
Yeah, it's a good one. And then who or what has been inspiring to you recently?
Recently. So there is this founder, her name is Susanna Welford. She is the founder of a nonprofit called Running Start. And she is training young girls and women to run for office in the future. And the reason why I admire her so much is because I saw my path in hers. And I remember speaking with her when I felt kind of lost with the foundation. And when she told me her story, I was like, have faith, you can do this.
Yeah.
And she's doing a beautiful work, and I collaborated with her in the summer, and she helped me with a training last year for Hispanic immigrants to run for office. And I think it's so important what she's doing, and her soul is just beautiful. So I really like her.
Yeah, sounds like an amazing organization. I'll have to check that out. And do you have another organization that you'd like to share about?
Oh, yes. So there are two that I am particularly fascinated with. So one of them is Girl Up, which is it's more about an initiative that is under the umbrella of the United Nations Foundation. And once again, they are working with young girls because you need to invest in the future, and youth is the future. With the difference that they are like around the world, giving them the tools to become advocates for gender equality. And I think that's beautiful because they are not only respecting their context, but also giving them the opportunity to develop their own agenda and just like supporting their path. So I think that's extremely powerful, especially if you do it around the world in a consistent way. And I understand like they have been doing that for almost 10 years now. And the other organization that I really like is the Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. And I think it's actually very nice as well because instead of focusing on women, on young girls, they're focusing on immigrants, on Latinas, to advance the sexual and reproductive justice agenda in the United States. So those are my new discoveries this year, and I really love what they're doing.
And then what is your one message to send to the world?
Let's discover the world together. Let's continue learning from each other and allows ourselves to reflect on what's going on around ourselves and to take action. I think we need to go back to our humanity, and for that we need to actually meet and speak about these things and just be present and be human and be connected again.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Gaby Rodriguez. You can continue to follow all the work that Gaby is doing with the Amazona Foundation at Amazona Foundation on Instagram or at AmazonaFoundation.com. You can also follow the Illuminate podcast at Illuminate_pod on Twitter or at the Illuminate podcast on Instagram. And if you're looking to add more podcasts to your feed, don't forget to check out the other podcasts in the Sandy Boy Productions podcast network. We have 2 running-based podcasts. I'll have another with Lindsay Hine and the Up and Running podcast. And then we have a parenting podcast also hosted by Lindsay called the Why Is Everyone Yelling podcast. And then our latest addition to the Sandy Boy Productions podcast network is the Urban Pharmacy. This is all about healthy, plant-based, and low-tox living. All right, that's all I've got for today. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Gaby Rodriguez, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.